You need to leave, right now, before I say something I can't take back." That was my son's voice, at my own granddaughter's baptism, directed at me. I stood there holding a small envelope, the kind you buy at Shoppers Drug Mart for $2, white with a little pink bow on the corner. Inside was a cheque. I had written it out that morning at my kitchen table in Guelph, sitting in the same chair I've sat in for 31 years, with my reading glasses and my cup of Earl Grey, the way I do everything important in my life, quietly, without ceremony. My daughter-in-law hadn't even opened it. She'd looked at the envelope, looked at me, and handed it back. "We don't need charity, Audrey," she said. That was the word she used. Charity. Like I was a stranger at the door with a tin can. My son, my boy, the one I drove to hockey practice at 5 in the morning for 9 winters straight, stood behind her and said nothing. And then, when I didn't move fast enough, he said what I told you he said. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I picked up my purse. I walked to the door of their house in Oakville, and I let myself out into the February cold. I sat in my car for 11 minutes before I could see clearly enough to drive. I want to tell you how I got here, because it didn't start at the baptism. It started long before that, with a blue plastic folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet behind the Hydro bills and the old tax returns for almost 22 years. I grew up in a small town outside of Sudbury. My father worked the mine. My mother cleaned houses on the weekends to put a little aside, not because we were desperate, but because she understood something that took me a long time to fully absorb. Money you don't see is money no one can take. I married at 26. His name was Robert. He was a good man, funny, steady, careful with his hands and his words. He worked in municipal water management for the region of Waterloo. I worked part-time at a dental office until my son was born, and then I stayed home until he started school, and then I went back. Nothing glamorous. A receptionist, then an office administrator, then, eventually, the practice manager for a 3-dentist clinic on Stone Road. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't careless either. Robert died in 2009. Heart attack sudden on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 57. Our son was 23. The grief of that year is not what this story is about. But I'll tell you this much. When you lose someone suddenly, the thing that surprises you most isn't the sadness, it's the paperwork, the accounts, the pension, the life insurance, the decisions you have to make while your hands are still shaking. I learned more about money in the 18 months after Robert died than I had in the previous 30 years of my life. And one of the things I learned was that Robert had been careful. Careful in a way he'd never fully explained to me, because he was modest and a little old-fashioned, and he thought talking about money was somehow unseemly. He'd had a financial advisor at a firm in Kitchener since 1994, a quiet, methodical man named, well, it doesn't matter. What matters is that Robert had been putting away a portion of every paycheck since he was 31 years old into a mix of RRSPs and non-registered investments, and he had never touched them. The total, when everything was settled, was significant. Not obscene, not lottery winner money, but significant. I kept working. I didn't change anything about my life. I drove the same 2007 Civic. I kept my apartment in Guelph. I downsized from the house after Robert passed, with the second-hand couch and the wall calendar from the credit union and the pots I'd had since before my son was born. I wasn't performing humility. I genuinely didn't want more than I had. What I wanted was to feel safe, and what I'd learned from Robert and from my mother before him was that safety is invisible on purpose. I did add one thing, though. At the advice of the financial planner, I opened an additional account at a different institution, a credit union, not a bank. I made regular contributions every month, amounts that wouldn't raise flags, that fit inside my regular budget. Over the years, I added to it when I could, an inheritance from my aunt in 2013, a small property sale in 2017 when I sold a lot Robert had bought years ago outside of Collingwood. I kept the account statements in that blue plastic folder. Behind the Hydro bills, I told no one. My son knew I had Robert's pension and some savings. He assumed it was modest. He had no reason to think otherwise. I was his mother, the woman who clipped grocery coupons from the Guelph Tribune and bought her winter coat at Value Village because the quality was just as good and she saw no reason to pay retail. That was true, all of it, and none of it was the whole picture. He met his wife, Charlene, in 2016. She came from money, not generational wealth, but the loud, visible kind. Her parents had a large house in Mississauga and a timeshare in Florida and strong opinions about brands. She was not unkind to me at first. She was simply indifferent in the way some people are indifferent to things they don't find useful. I noticed, but I said nothing. It wasn't my place. The first Thanksgiving I spent with them as a couple, she asked me, in front of her own mother, what I thought I would do when I couldn't manage the apartment on my own anymore. I was 61. I had just come from a 10-kilometer charity walk for the Guelph Humboldt Food Bank. I smiled and said, I supposed I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. She laughed a little, like she'd made a small joke that had landed. After that, I paid attention more carefully. I noticed that when my son called me, it was usually to ask something. A favor, watching the dog, dropping off a dish before a dinner party, being available on short notice. I was reliable in the way that a utility is reliable. You don't think about the electricity until it's gone. When Charlene got pregnant, I knitted. I drove to Oakville. I brought food, the kind that freezes well. Cabbage rolls, lentil soup, a shepherd's pie. She thanked me without looking up from her phone. My son said it was great, Mom, really. That word, really, carrying the weight of something he didn't quite have the courage to say directly. After the baby came, I visited when I was invited, which was less often than I'd expected. Charlene's mother was there constantly. She lived 20 minutes away. I was an hour and 15 minutes on the 401, and I worked 4 days a week, and I didn't presume. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I should have pushed harder. I've asked myself that question many times since. The baptism was scheduled for a Saturday in February. My granddaughter, Hazel, they named her Hazel, which I love, was 4 months old. I'd been planning my gifts since before she was born. I'm going to explain the check because the amount matters and the amount requires context. For 22 years, I had contributed to that credit union account, monthly, sometimes more. I had never made a single withdrawal. I had watched it grow with the slow, unglamorous patience of someone who is in no hurry because she has no intention of spending it herself. It was not for me. I had known, since the year Robert died, that I was saving for my son, and eventually for his children, the kind of money that changes a generation, that pays off a mortgage, funds an education, removes the particular anxiety of never being sure you'll be all right. That was what I wanted to give him. Not a coat, not a pot roast, not the electricity he'd stopped noticing. The check I wrote for Hazel's baptism was for $40,000. Not my entire savings, not even close, but a real beginning, a restart contribution that would grow, that would be there when she was 18 and the world was expensive and her parents were tired. I wrote for Hazel's education on the memo line. I sealed it in a white envelope with a pink bow from Shoppers. You already know what happened. I drove home from Oakville on the 401 in the dark, listening to a CBC Radio Ideas episode I'd already heard, not really hearing it. I went to bed at 9:30. I lay there staring at the ceiling of my apartment until sometime after 2. In the morning, I called my financial advisor. She'd been managing my accounts for 6 years by then, a woman who had come recommended through a friend at church. careful and no nonsense in the best possible way. I told her what had happened. Not all of it, just the shape of it. I asked her to prepare an overview of the full account for me. Everything consolidated. She called me back that afternoon. "Audrey," she said, "are you sitting down?" I told her I was standing at my kitchen window watching the squirrels in the backyard. "You should sit down." 22 years of contributions, the investments Robert had made, the inheritance, the property sale, the monthly deposits I had never once dipped into, compounded returns, a market that, despite everything, had over 2 decades done what it tends to do. The number she read me was not what I'd been casually tracking in my head. It was considerably larger. I sat down. I didn't call my son. Not that day, not the following week. I thought about what Charlene had said about charity. I thought about the word carefully. Charity implies a power imbalance, the person who gives and the person who needs. She had used it to diminish me, to put me in the position of the one who needs, the one who is barely managing, the elderly mother who needs to be tolerated at family events and managed out of the room when she's no longer convenient. She had the power imbalance exactly backwards. I'm not proud of what came next in terms of my emotions. There was anger, real anger, the kind I hadn't felt since a conflict at my old workplace years before. There was also something colder and more clarifying, which I can only describe as the particular peace of knowing exactly what you're going to do. I called my lawyer, a woman I'd used for my will and for the property sale in 2017. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. I did not contact my son. I updated my will, not in a vindictive way, I want to be clear about that, but in an honest way. Hazel remained in it. My son remained in it. The terms, however, were restructured. There are now conditions. There is a trustee who is not my son. There is a letter, written by me in plain language, that explains everything. The account, the years, the amounts, the envelope with the pink bow, the word charity, and what it means for the years ahead. My financial advisor, once I gave her the full picture, advised me on some additional steps. I moved portions of the account into different structures. There are things in place now that are quiet and patient and, like my mother always taught me, invisible on purpose. I also did one more thing. 3 weeks after the baptism, I drove to Oakville. I called ahead. My son answered, sounding surprised, a little wary. I said I'd like to drop something off for Hazel, if that was all right. He said it was. When I arrived, Charlene was there. She was polite, a surfer's politeness, the kind she used when she'd perhaps been spoken to about the previous incident. My son stood near the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. I handed Charlene a folder, not the blue plastic one from home, a clean, new one. Inside was a single printed page, a summary of the Respect account I had opened independently in Hazel's name, with a financial institution neither of them knew I used. The opening deposit was $40,000, the amount from the check she'd handed back. I said, "This is for Hazel. It's in her name. It'll be there when she's ready for it. You don't need to do anything." Charlene looked at the page. She looked at me. Something moved across her face that I won't try to interpret. My son said, "Mom." I said, "It's fine. Truly, I just wanted you to know it exists." I hugged Hazel, who was in the bouncy chair by the window, 4 months old and entirely unconcerned with the drama of the adults around her. I kissed her on the top of her head, which smelled like the particular warm sweetness that babies smell like, which is one of the best things in the world. I said goodbye. I let myself out. It has been 7 months since the baptism. My son and I speak occasionally, carefully, with the stilted courtesy of 2 people who are not yet sure what they are to each other now. I don't know what he knows about the full picture. I haven't told him, The letter in my will does that work eventually, when it needs to. Charlene sent me a text in April. It said, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to do better." I replied that I'd like that too. We haven't spoken since, but the door is open, and I've been around long enough to know that doors matter more than words. What I want to say, and I want to say it plainly, not dramatically, is that the hardest part of this whole story wasn't the baptism. It wasn't the word charity or my son's voice in that doorway. The hardest part was the 22 years before it. The discipline of putting something away every single month without ever seeing what it was becoming. The faith that it mattered. The quiet of it. My mother scrubbed floors in other people's houses so that my father's mining wages weren't the only thing standing between us and the next bad thing. She never talked about it. It wasn't drama. It was just what you did. I used to think that was old-fashioned. I used to think the world had moved on from that kind of patience. But here I am. The envelope with the pink bow cost me $2 at Shoppers Drug Mart. The check inside was worth $40,000. My daughter-in-law handed it back to me and called it charity. She wasn't wrong that there was a power imbalance in that room. She just had no idea which direction it ran. I'm 67 years old. I still drive a Civic. I still drink Earl Grey at my kitchen table in the same chair, with my reading glasses, doing the quiet and careful things that nobody notices until, one day, they have to. Hazel is 11 months old now. She has her grandfather's eyes. When she is 18 and the world is expensive and everything feels uncertain, there will be something there for her. Patient and invisible and entirely hers. That was always the plan. The word that stays with me is charity, not because it hurt, though it did, but because of how confidently she said it. Charlene looked at that envelope and decided in half a second what it was, what I was, and what my place in that room was worth. That kind of certainty, built on nothing but appearances, is its own kind of poverty. I've thought about what I could have done differently, said something sharp, opened my mouth in that doorway when my son told me to leave. But I've lived long enough to know that dignity isn't defended with words in the moment. It's built over decades, quietly, in the choices nobody sees. My mother knew that. Robert knew it. I learned it later than either of them, but I learned it. What I keep coming back to is this. The things that actually protect you in this life are never the things that look impressive at a baptism. They're the things in the bottom drawer. The accounts nobody knows about. The counts nobody knows about. The patience that doesn't announce itself. I spent 22 years making small decisions that added up to something real, and I did it without ever needing anyone to notice. That discipline, the willingness to do the right thing for yourself and your family even when no one is watching, even when it's unglamorous, even when you're buying your winter coat at Value Village and driving a 15-year-old Civic. That's not a sacrifice. That's a form of integrity that compounds just like interest does. The intelligence part took me longer to appreciate. It wasn't enough to save. I had to learn what to do with it, how money actually works, how accounts are structured, what questions to ask a financial planner, how to read a statement and understand what it means. None of that was taught to me. I had to go looking for it, especially in that terrible first year after Robert died, when I was grieving and exhausted and suddenly responsible for decisions I'd never made before. But I went looking, and that willingness to keep learning, to sit across from someone who knows more than you do and say, "Explain this to me," that matters as much as any dollar amount. And then there's the stamina of it, not just financial stamina, the kind that lets you walk out of your granddaughter's baptism with your coat and your purse and your head level, and drive home on the 401 in the dark, and lie awake until 2 in the morning, and still get up the next day and make the call and do the next right thing. That's not toughness in the dramatic sense. It's just showing up again, quietly, after the thing that knocked you sideways. That's what my mother did every Saturday morning when she drove to someone else's house and scrubbed their floors. She showed up. She kept going. She never made a speech about it. Hazel won't know any of this for years. When she's 18 and the account statement arrives, she won't know about the pink bow or the word charity or the drive home in the dark. That's fine. The point was never to be recognized. The point was to make sure she has something solid under her feet when she needs it. Put there by a woman she'll hopefully remember as her grandmother, who was steady and kind and always had Earl Grey on. That's enough. It always was.